Welcome to the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution and Civic Responsibility, an ongoing inquiry into the origins and evolution of American government. The Executive Director of the Virtual Center is Dr. Bill O'Brien. He's also the host of this discussion. And here he is, Dr. Bill O'Brien.
Thank you very much, Agnes, and welcome to a Tuesday edition of the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution and Civic Responsibility. Today is Tuesday. It is the 4th day of October in the year 2016. It is a pleasure to be with you on what is it turned out to be a beautiful day here. We had some fog and some cloudiness and rather chilly this morning, but it's absolutely delightful out there now. And it's, I guess, tomorrow there is a little bit of chance of rain, but not much. It looks like the best chance we got is going to be tied up with Hurricane Matthew, and we need rain, but I don't want it that way. I mean, I'm hearing reports of 40 inches of rain in the Caribbean, and I don't think anybody would ever find West Virginia again if we ever had 40 inches of rain. My heavens, 7.5 inches of rain this past June killed 22 West Virginians. So anyway, welcome to today's program on the Virtual Center. It's a pleasure to be with you on this second day. We're starting, as we always do on Tuesday, 30 minutes later than we usually do. I am just fresh in from a Rotary meeting locally, and our program today was our newly elected Republican Congressman Evan Jenkins, who replaced Congressman Nick Rahall after 38 years of representing Southern West Virginia in Congress. And so Mr. Jenkins was giving us his read on his first 22 years, 22 months, nearing the end of his first term in Congress. And last week we had the Democratic challenger for that seat, Matthew Detch, and today we heard Evan Jenkins, and kind of with the program buzzing around in my head today that I was hoping we could do in the Virtual Center. I kind of got thrown off my game a little bit by listening to the question and answer session with Congressman Evan Jenkins, because his perspective and his answers weren't exactly the same answers that I would give. On the other hand, they were pretty predictable. I was telling Agnes before we went on the air that I kept waiting and waiting and waiting for him to respond to one question that would be a response that I had not anticipated, and it didn't happen. He basically followed script pretty closely, I guess is what I would say. Anyway, welcome to today's program on this beautiful Tuesday. Election Day is 5 weeks from today, and I think all of us are kind of hoping that it would get here, because I think most of us are pretty tired of the political conversations. I mean, I'm absolutely captivated by it. And at the same time, it's been going on for, when you think that Donald Trump announced for the presidency in June of last year, that's how long this campaign's been going. So I think, and I'm fairly tired, and I'm guessing that a lot of other people are as well. And of course, I'm conducting my own. I have a speaking engagement this evening, and I'm engaged in my own campaign. And basically, people have asked me about winning and losing. Do you think you got a good chance? Blah blah blah. And to tell you the truth, when you get into the campaign, the two things become separate. The first thing is getting through the campaign, and I guess when that's over, then you worry about whether you're winning or losing, or won or lost, or whatever. But it's an experience, and it's an experience that I'm very, very glad that I took on, because it's exposed me to issues and perspectives that I wouldn't have experienced otherwise. We have a phone number here at the Virtual Center, and it gives you an opportunity to be heard. by our other listeners by getting on the air when we're on live, and we are today. If you call 304-663-4676, Agnes is in the Head On Radio Network studios, and she will get you on the air pronto. And we would love to hear from you. If you listened to yesterday's program, you know that for the last 15 minutes of hour one in yesterday's program, Agnes joined the conversation and just added immensely to it. It really, I think, was a huge contribution to the success, what I thought was the success of yesterday's program. If you were with us, I hope you agree that I thought yesterday's program was pretty good. I think the things that got out that we were able to address are the things that I hope we would address, and but I hadn't obviously been able to plan for or anticipate the contribution that Agnes's comments would make, and that just added, just tied a ribbon around the program like you wouldn't believe. I just thought it was fabulous, and I appreciate that so much. And I want her to know that the invitation is always open for her to join us. As many of you know, if you've listened over the past weeks and months, Bob, when he's in the studio, Bob will often join us. Bob's a little bit like Donald Trump in a way. Don't you dare tell him that I said that. But and what I mean is, when you get to know Bob and appreciate him, you also know that there are certain ways that you can shake his cage and you get a response. There are certain issues that never get by Bob Kincaid, and I mean that. And what I mean is, and that's the thing about Trump, the one thing we knew going into the first debate is that you can rattle him, and you can provoke him, and you can get him to respond as you want him to respond. I've read accounts, as I'm sure you have, about the so-called traps that Hillary kind of laid for him, and he kind of walked into every one. And in other words, he's predictable, and you can provoke him, and he can't back off. He won't back down. He won't pass up a good exchange, I guess is what I'd say. And so in that sense, and believe me, I'm not insulting Bob Kincaid by comparing him with Donald Trump, but in that one sense, that there are certain issues that Bob feels very, very strongly about. And going into a program, when we're doing a program, I almost can tell this is one that's liable to get a response out of Bob. And invariably it does. Not always, but frequently. What I want to say on that is that when he does join us, it always adds to the program immensely. And yesterday we found out that when Agnes joined in, it added to the program immensely as well. So I want to thank her and him, and I want to invite them to feel very comfortable in joining us. If the topic or the conversation warrants it. In other words, if you feel very strongly about a particular issue and you feel that you have something to contribute to the conversation, then by all means, avail yourself of our phone number. It's area code 304-663-4676. 304-663-HORN, HORN. If you're a little bit reluctant to get on the air, but at the same time you feel that you have a contribution to make and you'd like to drop me an email, I'd be happy to take on the chore, and I mean that positively, of getting your ideas and your thoughts on the air in your behalf. Because I think the main thing is the contribution that you have, not who does it. Obviously, we would much prefer to hear you, but if for some reason or other you'd prefer not to do that and you'd like me to do it, I'd be glad to do it. My email address is waobrien906@gmail.com. That's waobrien, OBRIEN 906 @gmail.com. And again, I do remind you of our Facebook page. If you are a regular user of Facebook, we spent quite a bit of time yesterday talking about Facebook. Then if you go to the homepage, you'll see at the top a search box. And if you type into the search box, the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution, you will be into our Facebook page, and there are a number of postings on that page. I have not put anything on there since our program yesterday. I am anticipating putting something on there later this evening or possibly tomorrow, depending on time, because I do have an engagement this evening. And I'm intending, I expect, that it will be based on our program today. I anticipate that the issues that we'll be raising in today's program will be enhanced if I can get something down in writing and put it on our Facebook page between now and our program tomorrow. And if I don't make it, then by all means, after our program tomorrow, I will take that on as a first responsibility, because I think that where we'll be going today, hopefully, is something that really is worth some time, some thought, some reflection, some conversation. And I hope you agree. You'll remember that yesterday, toward the end of our program yesterday, we were looking at an article in the New York Times by columnist David Brooks. And the title of that piece, which appeared on last Friday, I believe, September 30th, the title of that piece was, I just want to make sure I get the title correct, The Death of Idealism. And basically, you'll recall that we had some time. We had about 20, 25 minutes left in our program yesterday, long enough to cover the article. But we really didn't have enough time to do anything with it or to take what's in it to what I think is the next and most valuable next step, as it were. And I had anticipated that if we could get the article covered yesterday, then we could begin today's program by picking up on that and with that and going on. And that's what I anticipate we'll do. You'll recall, and this is review, but again, I mentioned that the article is written by David Brooks. It was in the September 30th, that's last Friday's New York Times. If you go to nytimes.com and then hit the opinion section, and under opinion, you will get a list of columnists. And if you hit columnists, just look at David Brooks, and the article we're talking about is his article of last Friday. I believe you'll find that David Brooks had a new piece in today's New York Times, because Tuesday is his day. My schedule today made it impossible for me to check on what David Brooks might have put in the Times today. I'll be looking at that later. But if you just hit NewYorkTimes.com and then opinion, you'll get on the left-hand side a menu, and one of the items in that menu is columnists. And if you hit columnists, you'll get an alphabetical list of all those who write for the New York Times. And David Brooks is right near the top, obviously. And the article that we're talking about is the one dated September 30th, last Friday. As I mentioned yesterday, the very title, The Death of Idealism, is one that attracted me and attracted my attention. And we looked at it yesterday, and what David Brooks was doing was comparing the Trump campaign and the Hillary Clinton campaign for president through the prism, if you will, of idealism. And what he pointed out is that Donald Trump's emergence on the national scene, as it were. He became a household name, for the most part, in the 1980s. In other words, he was a product of the very positive environment in the early and mid-80s, created by the election of Ronald Reagan. More specifically, the positive environment towards capitalism created by the Reagan campaign and the Reagan presidency. This was the period, you'll remember, when people saw the possibility that capitalism would successfully overcome and bring down the Soviet Union. And in 89, it did. In 1989. Well, as Brooks points out, Donald Trump opened Trump Tower on Fifth Avenue in Manhattan in November of 1983. He was a product of that environment, that idealism, that faith that people had in the 80s about the miraculous things that unrestrained, unregulated capitalism could do, not only for the nation and its citizens, but for the world. And basically, that was the period when we saw capitalism, as Brooks maintains, washing away the stagnation of the 1970s. This was the economic revolution, if you will, the economic recovery after the Carter administration in the late 70s. And you'll remember, of course, that was tied with the escalation in the price of imported oil, the shutdown of gasoline stations, the rationing of gasoline, and all of that. Many of us who lived through that can remember it very well. Well, theoretically, Reaganism was going to cure all of that. And so basically, the unchecked optimism associated with capitalism that was so prevalent in the 1980s is the background or the context out of which the nation discovered Donald Trump. And one of the things that people believed, of course, was that capitalism not only could generate recovery, economic recovery, but that it was a way to encourage people to work hard, to be creative. In other words, it was, in effect, a revolution in progress. Well, many of us know that for some people, the revolution did indeed pan out. But for a lot of people, it didn't. And eventually, the optimism associated with capitalism began to dissipate some. And we began to see more and more of the seedy side of capitalism, namely the greed side, the self-interest side, the me-first side, if you will. And of course, we know then, as we look at Donald Trump, and we've been looking at him now for a year and a half during this extended campaign for president that he is engaged in, we now know that some of the behavior and some of the activities and some of the attitudes and some of the comments that Donald Trump has been responsible for have convinced many of us, even those who support him, that he really does represent sort of the negative side of capitalism, if you will. I was going to say communism, capitalism, if you will. And from Brooks's point of view, that's the theme of his article, that the idealism that was so rampant, so positive early in the 1980s, eventually dissipated. And what we ended up with was the selfishness and the greed and that brought on the recession, the Great Recession of 08, 07, 08. The tremendous displacement that occurred in wealth as a result of the recession, the tremendous gap in income and wealth that has resulted, where now we have the so-called 1% and the 99 percenters, and we're experiencing a degree of inequality in wealth and income in this country that the nation has not experienced ever before, not to this degree. To some people, it's a throwback to the Gilded Age of the late 19th century. But some people would argue that in many ways this one's even worse, if for no other reason than that we should know better. And David Brooks mentions that he has been invited to some of the parties at Trump Towers, and he's been observing many of the people who were invited to these parties by Trump. And Brooks himself says that Trump was always a scuzzy version of the capitalist type. And if you look around, the so-called B-grade celebrities and corrupt city officials that attended many of these parties thrown by Trump, Brooks quotes a friend of his who said at one of those parties that the atmosphere kind of said, "Not indicted, not invited." In other words, it almost seemed like everybody in there was a carbon copy of Donald Trump, the self-interested side of success and capitalism and greed. I mean, this was a network opportunity for people who were not controlled or limited, if you will, by concerns about ethics and morality. This was a network opportunity for the movers and the shakers, those people that spend their lives walking on the edge, if you will, between legality and illegality in many cases. And this is, from Brooks's perspective, what we're looking at as we experience or witness this campaign unfold before us. The sort of sleazy side of capitalism. It's the individualism, but the give back to the community part that most of the time goes with it is missing. This is kind of, I'm going to get mine, you worry about getting yours. It's raw, unadulterated self-interest. And it kind of throws a pall. It kind of creates a negative environment over what many people in the early 1980s believed was a very, very positive thing, this capitalism, so-called. Then David Brooks looks at Hillary Clinton, and he characterizes her as initially a product of the idealism of the 1960s. The very social concerns, the social issues associated with liberalism of the 1960s. The idea that you could remake society, that you could reinvigorate community, that you could put people in the forefront as the priority of what government and what society and what economics is and ought to be all about. And Brooks begins by citing passages from Hillary Clinton's speech at Wellesley College, and you know, as student president as president of student government at Wellesley. And what she's talking about is the optimism of the 1960s, the idealism, the idea that we are the generation, she said in the 1960s, that can lead the nation to a new day. We can really turn what for many people is a negative life into a good life. The challenge, she said in that address, is to practice politics as the art of making what appears to be impossible possible. We're not interested in social reconstruction, she said. It's human reconstruction. We're searching for more immediate, ecstatic, penetrating modes of living, unquote. She dreamed of a society where trust would be restored, where you don't manipulate people, where you're not interested in socially engineering people. The words are grandiose. They had almost a spiritual aspect to them. This was idealism in the extreme. This was positivism, optimism, progressivism. Brooks notes that there was a note of the poetic in it. Another word that Brooks uses, which I think is a very, very choice word in this, her address was aspirational. It uplifted people. It caused people or encouraged people to dream, to feel good, to feel optimistic, to believe that something called the American dream really was there and might possibly be there for each of them. Now we look at the campaign for president that Hillary Clinton is conducting. And what we see, as we see in the Trump campaign, is a significant change, pretty much the disappearance of the idealism that seemed to characterize Hillary Clinton in the 1960s. What we've got now is what Brooks calls pure interest group liberalism. Buying votes by promising particular programs to particular groups of people. Not inspiring an image of the common good at all. Rather, rewarding certain groups of people for their support by directing government largesse their way. The unemployed, the poor, the retired, health care, education, all of these things that are important to large numbers of people are a way to get votes. And so what Brooks is looking at the Clinton campaign as doing, as catering to this seedier side of liberalism, the optimism, the spiritual nature of the idealism that so characterized her in the 1960s is gone. Thus, both in Trump's campaign and in Hillary Clinton's campaign, David Brooks sees what he has called as his title, the death of idealism. He points out the twin revolutions of the 1960s and the 1980s liberated the individual, first socially and then economically, and it weakened the community. More surprising, this boomer versus boomer campaign has decimated idealism. All of the positives, all of the promise, if you will, of uplifting community seems to be gone. Now it's come down almost to who's connected, who's got the contacts, who can work the network, who can bring the largesse their way. In other words, and this is me, this isn't Brooks, it almost makes lobbying look like a way to characterize the relationship between government and citizens. It almost makes the idea of lobbying the only way to make it anymore. You got to have contacts. You got to be able to network. You got to know where to go and who to talk to get what you need. It's not in your power to define or generate what you need. It's in somebody else's hands. It's in corporations, or it's in businesses' hand, or it's in your elected officials, or whatever. But it isn't in yours. And so the optimism and the idealism of community reform and the optimism and idealism associated with progressivism is now devoid of its aspirational, spiritual character. Brooks points out, there's no uplift in this race. There is an entire absence in both campaigns of any effort to appeal to the higher angels of our nature. Excuse me for that. That was a coughing break, and I'm sorry. I had to take a sip of coffee to kind of kill that one. I love the phrase, the higher angels of our nature, because we've spent a lot of time here in the Virtual Center questioning whether, in fact, there is a higher nature, a higher angel in our nature at all. We've looked at James Madison in Federalist Number 10, talking about factions being sown in the nature of man, and about the need to create a system within government of pitting ambition against ambition in order to control the evils of faction. And again, we looked at the other side of Madison, and we saw that Madison did believe in this Scottish Enlightenment idea of the moral sense as part of an important component of human nature. So even Madison would acknowledge that there are indeed higher angels in our nature. But Brooks points out we're not seeing them in this campaign. I think of the absence of civility, the name-calling, the innuendo, the slander that we're seeing on a day-to-day basis in this campaign is disheartening to a lot of people. There is an assumption, Brooks says, in both campaigns that we're self-seeking creatures rather than loving, serving, hoping, dreaming, cooperating creatures. There's a presumption in both candidates that the lowest motivations are the most real. Basically, then, Brooks's thesis is that what we're seeing in this campaign is the death of idealism. The idealism that produced both of these candidates is gone. And it's been replaced by something much less admirable. And we're in a process of choosing the lesser of two evils, as it were. So Brooks's conclusion is that whoever wins this election, we're going to have to find a way to restore idealism in this society. We're going to have to find a way to bring the optimism within people back into the process. That's pretty much Brooks's piece on what he calls the death of idealism. I think this is where we got to when we ended our program yesterday. I don't think we had the time to digest or reflect on the particular issues that Brooks is raising or some of the assumptions that he's making. For example, one of the things that I noted in this particular piece by David Brooks is that his characterization of the end of idealism, the death of idealism in both campaigns, seems to make sense the way he explains it. But on the other hand, that's not the only way to look at it. One could make the case that the absence of idealism in one situation produced or led naturally to the need to abandon idealism in the other. For one side to remain idealistic, while the other side has become self-interested and principally interested in taking. If you're dealing with one group that is interested only in taking for themselves, and the other group remains idealistic, then you're talking about victims. It seems to me that one could argue that this role that Hillary Clinton is defining for government is the only logical, realistic antidote, if you will, to the scuzzy side of capitalism which has surfaced from the initial optimism or idealism of the early 1980s. I think all of us have had the opportunity, as we witnessed the recession in 07, 08, and saw the displacement and the transfer of wealth that has occurred as a result of it. We hear Donald Trump saying that the housing crash in the recession was a good thing for him because it made lucrative properties available at bargain basement prices. In the crudest sense, that's true. But if you consider the people displaced, if you think about the people who lost their homes, their jobs, their savings, their health care, their dignity, their self-respect, their future, it's hard to justify the burst of the housing bubble as a positive thing. Only a Donald Trump could see it that way. I've mentioned before, I have a good friend who is a retirement counselor, an economic advisor, if you will. And he has always maintained that when the market goes down, when the stock market goes down, that's the time to buy. And his favorite expression is when people ask him, does it bother you that the market has gone down 400 or 500 points in the Dow over the last 3 weeks or something? And this is just, that's not really happening now, but it has happened. His position is no. What it means is there's a fire sale. This is the time to buy up because this is the time that stock prices are going down. This is the this is the time when you can buy in and then be there when the value of the stock begins to go back up. It's a profit-making opportunity. But it's only a profit-making opportunity for those with ready cash. And if you've been wiped out financially, then you can't turn devastation into an opportunity. Only a few people can. And I think from Donald Trump's perspective, to brag about that and talk about the investment opportunities rendered available by the displacement of millions of people from their homes seems to speak to the Brooks thesis about the death of idealism. There seems to be nothing in Trump's comments that smack of the idealism that we saw so prominent in the early 1980s. when Donald Trump emerged on the national scene. So the fact of the matter is, David Brooks is providing one perspective, one particular way to look at the death of idealism in both campaigns. But I would suggest that you can see one as a response to the other. I would suggest that the opportunities for profit for the few that came out of the recession in 07, 08, 09 convinced many people that the system was unfair and that something needed to be done to inject fairness back into the system, to take care of the little guy, to introduce what the Pope Francis called the moral perspective or the moral dimension back into the equation, back into decision making. And so, in effect, if you look at it that way, then what Hillary Clinton's campaign is advocating is not self-interest devoid of idealism so much as necessity in order to patch the holes created by the gap that potentially threatens to render the republic dysfunctional. I made a note on my hard copy of this particular piece by David Brooks, and I said Hillary's version of individualism is her appeal to her constituents on the same grounds as Trump, self-interest. She promises them the same shot that he's getting. In other words, what she's basically saying is, if we get elected, we will utilize the offices of government to do for the people who didn't get anything but hurt before and help get these people back on their feet. For example, here in West Virginia, the so-called Obama war on coal and the negative attitudes within West Virginia towards President Obama's EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, for the standards that many people argue have driven the final nail into the coffin of coal, so to speak. What people don't mention is that in Hillary Clinton's speech, the speech in which she talked about the fact that the shift in energy from the end of fossil fuels into cleaner energy is going to cost a lot of coal miners their jobs. It was a mistake on her part to say it that way, but what she was doing was laying the groundwork for a program that she envisioned bringing tens of millions of dollars into Appalachia in order to undertake the diversification of an economy that never happened so long as coal was dominant, because coal intentionally retarded and defeated diversification of the economy. And the result was that the transition is going to be very painful. And what Hillary Clinton was talking about was the role that the federal government, her federal government, was planning to take in order to make this difficult transition more manageable for the states of Appalachia. That part of the speech never gets quoted. Only the part about destroying coal jobs as justification for the term Obama's war on coal. That's what I'm talking about. That then raises questions about Brooks's interpretation of the death of idealism. But on the other hand, it doesn't deny the validity of his piece. It just speaks to the fact that what he has contributed to the conversation about the death of idealism is important. It's valuable. It has a number of potential different meanings. That means it's worthy of reflection, conversation, and consideration. It's important because all of us realize that a society devoid of idealism, hope, concern for others, a pure Gesellschaft, a society of self-interest, greed, and me-firstism, is a psychological burden that no society can sustain for very long. Brooks is right. We've got to build hope back into the nation's psychology. We can't allow this apparent death of idealism to cause us to try to make it without any idealism. We've got to restore community. We've got to restore health. We've got to restore self-help, but we've got to restore concern for others as well. We have got to put the moral equation, so to speak, back into the decision-making apparatus. We have got to look at the outcome of policies and programs we're anticipating. We've got to look at the prospective outcome on people, because it needs to guide us on what we do and what we can't afford to do. We can't afford to go any further in eliminating idealism from our society, because people without hope, people who are angry and frustrated and desperate, turn to drugs, crime, and various other things. Abuse, child abuse, spousal abuse, suicide, crime, destruction, violence. Many of the things that we see all around us. Only idealism can combat those things. Our political system has to make the restoration of idealism a priority, whoever happens to be in the White House. That's what I'm thinking about. I'm involved in a campaign. There's clearly a threat or a danger that all political campaigns become negative. That what one must do is attack one's opponent, demean one's opponent, question the integrity and the intent of one's opponent. That is not necessarily the only way to win an election, I hope. Because I can't do that. I won't do that. I had the experience, the pleasure, this past Saturday evening at an event to meet my opponent for the first time. But I know a lot about him from what people I've met on the campaign trail say about him. And basically, what I'm hearing is he's a good guy. I don't have any reason to believe he's not a good guy. I hope he believes that I am too. And I hope that our campaign, our contest, can be based on issues. My goal, my intent, is to build my campaign on idealism, on optimism, on positives. West Virginia's economy is tanking. People here are hurting. We're in trouble. And the blame game is rampant. It's coal, it's the coal companies, it's government, it's Obama, it's the EPA, it's the Democrats, it's the drugs. The fact of the matter is there nothing that we can inject into this campaign that would smack of the idealism that David Brooks talks about? There is. And let me see if I can explain what that is, where it is, and how to build it. It requires a little bit of history, but not a whole lot. Some facts. New York University conducted research recently on behalf of the United Nations. What the United Nations was looking for is data in order to try to get a handle on what nations, developing nations, needed to do in order to make sure that economic development, economic expansion, and growth work for everybody, not just a few people. The concern was we need to expand opportunities around the world, but we need to do it in ways that help entire societies, entire nations to experience and enjoy the benefits of modern civilization and standards of living, education, health. The prospects of community, the Gemeinschaft side of a world that seemed to be spinning out of control toward pure Gesellschaft. That's really what the Pope's encyclical in June of 2015 was all about. Well, here in West Virginia, especially in southern West Virginia, with the demise of coal and the tanking of the economy and the seemingly endless deficit expansion in the state budget, quality of life and standard of living in this area for many seems to be spinning out of control. Not for everybody, but for many. So West Virginia seems to be a good place to undertake a microcosm of a solution to the national problem that David Brooks writes about. Let me see if I can put some flesh on those bones. One of the things that the New York University research team came up with was hard evidence to demonstrate that throughout the world, there seemed to be an inverse proportion between quality of life and standard of living for people on the one hand, and wealth in natural resources in the other. More specifically, those areas of the world, those nations that were the wealthiest in natural resources, oil, coal, iron ore, timber, rubber, whatever the product was, tended to be nations where governments put less and less resources into human capital and more of their resources into extracting wealth. Economic growth became the process of extracting and exporting wealth. By definition, it's the absolute epitome of the ideal model of colonial mercantilism, the emergence of commercial capitalism. It is the reason why Great Britain would not allow the 13 American colonies to develop their own industry, to process their own raw materials. Mother country policy, the so-called Navigation Acts, if you remember your textbook history, required that the wealth of the colonies must be shipped to Mother England for processing. And then when the finished products, the jobs, were completed there, the finished products would be transported, sold back to the colonies, and the people in the colonies would now become consumers of manufactured goods. And the mother country would prosper. Independence of the 13 colonies was the only way the colonies could break that cycle. Because so long as they remained colonies, all of the wealth of the New World was being exported for somebody else's benefit, not ours. Consequently, if you look at the history of the world since then, those nations which are the wealthiest in natural resources have devoted government policy and resources, wealth, to the extraction of that wealth, the processing, the export of that wealth to nations of the world where it would be processed. The only thing that the people living in these areas got from the process, from economic development, were jobs. West Virginia got those jobs. West Virginia coal was booming for years. And West Virginia's government put all of its eggs into the coal basket. And the coal companies used every avenue at their disposal to discourage economic diversification, to discourage any other economic opportunity or livelihood except theirs. Consequently, West Virginia didn't put resources into its education like it should have, because an economy where most of the best jobs are in the mines is not an economy where the education of each individual student becomes a priority. That only occurs in nations that don't have natural resources. Those areas of the world which don't have their own natural wealth have to expend or invest in their people, because the development of their people is the only source of economic development that they have at their disposal. So consequently, those areas of the world that don't have sufficient natural resources tend to have the highest standard of living, the highest and best educational systems, the best quality health systems for their people. In other words, these governments have had to invest in people, in human capital, because they didn't have the natural wealth to focus economic development on. What does that mean? It means that what we call the two-party system didn't really mean anything in West Virginia. Democrats, Republicans, it didn't matter what you were, because economic development focused only around jobs, coal. The fact that West Virginia government was dominated by Democrats for a century didn't really matter. Democrats in West Virginia weren't Democrats at all, because the National Democratic Party was being defined by the progressive agenda of Roosevelt's New Deal, Truman's Fair Deal, and all that stemmed from it. In West Virginia, none of that mattered. None of it made its way into West Virginia. West Virginia Democrats were focused on policies and programs defined by and dictated by coal. For years, the Republican Party offered an alternative. They kept promising that if the Republican Party ever got strong enough to become viable in West Virginia government, they had a plan. They had a way to turn things around. Well, now, for two consecutive legislative sessions, Republicans have been in control of the West Virginia legislature. And the results have been disastrous. Why? Because it really didn't matter. The rules of the game were being dictated to government, not by government. And what West Virginia voters have been exposed to is pure personality politics. I'm voting for this guy because I knew his grandmother, and I know his family, and I know his kids, and I know which church he goes to, and he's a good Christian, and blah, 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 and all of that. That's the only thing that West Virginia citizens had to base their political decision-making on, because all the major decisions had already been made. Government in West Virginia was a show. It was a facade. It was like cardboard cutouts. Evidence of this? Look at the number of people, prominent people, who used to be Democrats, then became Republicans, then went back to being a Democrat again. Why? Because if you ask them, they say, in West Virginia, there's really no difference between Democrats and Republicans. You know what? They're right. There hasn't been. The National Democratic Party offers quite a difference, but it never gained inroads into this region. This economy has been a colonial economy from the beginning. Now, the basis of the wealth is gone. Not totally, but to a substantial degree, it's gone. Now, West Virginia has nothing to fall back on but its own people. all this talk about shale, about natural gas, about the gas wells, and gas is going to do for West Virginia what coal did and all of that. The fact of the matter is the people of West Virginia are hurting because it's never been a reality in West Virginia that government ever made it a priority to invest in them. Now government must invest.
Bill,
in its
you have a call. Horsak.
Oh, great. Okay. Who we got? Oh, we have Horst?
Yes,
Horst, do we have you?
Are you there, Horst?
You have me. Sorry, I'm getting a lot of echoing here. Give me a second to shut everything down. I'll be right with you.
Okay. All right, buddy.
Okay, how are we now?
You sound great.
Terrific. Fantastic. Yeah, I'm getting you loud and clear here too. So
great.
Yeah.
That's fantastic.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. When you call in on Skype, there's quite a bit of delay between the streaming client from the White Rose server. It's a little, more than usual. But anyway, I'm sorted out now, so no problems. Yeah.
Okay.
I read that the David Brooks article you linked to yesterday, and I kind of had a bit of a different take on it. Like I kind of tend to with him. To me, it kind of read more like a sort of an attempt to take the albatross of Donald Trump and sling it around Hillary's neck and just drown the both of them with one shot.
Uh-huh.
And this is what I find about David Brooks irritates me. He just does.
Okay. No, that's fine. That's fine.
And it's not that he's lacks, the ability and the talent and all that stuff. There's no question he's good at what he does, but it's just so dishonest. I mean, like the person who can take a story like, the Omelas story and work that in and derive a moral that because bad people exist in the world, we need to kill children or something like that. Just that you don't get over that. and
I hear you. I hear you.
This is the same.
So you don't forget, do you, buddy?
Oh no. But you know what I'm talking about, right?
Yeah, I do. I do.
And the funny thing is I had just read a story yesterday, I think, on Ezra Klein's website, Vox, about they were vetting some released audios from a secret Hillary fundraiser or speech or something like that, where she's talking about Bernie Sanders supporters. And like originally there was supposed to be like she said some really scandalous.
We're kind of losing you there for a second, Horst.
Oh, sorry. How's it now?
Okay. That's good now.
Okay, where did you lose me?
You said that there was a piece in Vogue about a secret Hillary Clinton something, and then from then on I couldn't get it.
Oh, okay, right. So supposedly she had slammed Bernie Sanders supporters back during the primary or something like that, and then it rapidly developed that no, she didn't say anything of the sort. And so the piece was actually about what she did say and how it wasn't anything bad about that. But at the same time, they could not help. There's like one or two sentences in there that kind of tied a rhetorical relationship, or not rhetorical, but like a motivational relationship between Trump supporters on the one hand and Sanders supporters during the primary on the other. This is one of the things that we've all, well, some of us have gotten used to, like through this long campaign season, is just this relentless, almost pathological desire to make all these false equivalency arguments, like this side's just like that side. They're all the same. Yeah. And so yesterday, Vox was saying that Trump supporters they had to slip. It was a little throwaway line, but it was unmistakable. Trump supporters on one hand, they think everything's rigged. Sanders, his supporters think everything's rigged, and so therefore they both want immediate change. And the opposition was that Hillary Clinton, on the other hand, is more of an incrementalist, and that was their argument. Their compare and contrast, right? That she wants incremental change because she doesn't believe anymore that big sweeping things are possible.
Right.
And then when you look at this David Brooks piece, he's making it sound like that Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton are both appealing to, like, selfish, venal motivations of the voters. Trump on one side, the scuzzy capitalist, and Hillary Clinton on the other side, just like, we'll give you government money, and you can have everything you want. Which, it's just, the funny thing is the way that Brooks sets up his entire argument is that he makes this comparison between, what is he comparing? A party that he went to in the 80s that Trump was hosting,
yes,
and a graduation speech, that Hillary Clinton delivered as the valedictorian, I suppose. I don't even know.
Yeah, she was valedictorian at Wells.
Yeah, these two events are comparable. Number one.
Yeah.
And then he takes her rhetoric and says this is sweeping, aspirational, inspiring kind of stuff. And then somehow, decades on, she's still fighting for. If you want to follow that line of argument, real changes, not just things that not social engineering as such, but, well, not that wouldn't be a real change, but
yeah.
But that somehow this has turned into just like some, liberal pablum kind of a thing. I mean, I don't even know where to go with that, and that this is somehow evidence that both sides are defeating the idea of community.
Mm-hmm.
When the entire 60s revolution, the revolutionary idea was a very, it was a return to community in a lot of ways. I mean, like that's where we got the communes with the hippies and stuff like that.
Right.
I mean, like as if you could just say that this was like another way of being selfish.
Right.
Or,
I mean, the idealism of the 60s was pretty much an alternative to the greed and the self-interest of capitalism.
Yeah.
Pretty much. And you're right, it was an idea of going back to community from the very beginning and finding a way to develop it this time so that everybody would benefit, not just a few.
Right.
Yeah. And that, you're right. That and that is a major difference between the two candidates and between the two idealisms, if you want to call it that.
Well, here's a key a selection from the Brooks article. He says the twin revolutions of the 1960s and the 1980s liberated the individual first socially and then economically. Like social liberation in the 1960s is equivalent to economic liberation in the 1980s. The 1980s was not about economic liberation. It was about, liberation from moral constraints about what's right and wrong when it comes to making a buck. And, and he just throws it in there. And then he says both weakened the community. And he doesn't explain how that happens. He just says, they're both the same thing. They both led to the same result.
This is good. This is good. This is really good. I mean, this is a perspective. And again, I think you're right. I think what it speaks to is the depth of what he's saying. I mean, there's just so much there, and you've just farmed it, and you brought up all sorts of great stuff.
It's the manipulation to me. I mean, I don't think this is an accident. I don't think that David Brooks is some kind of idealist who just doesn't get it. I think this is pretty calculated. He wants to, again, this is just another media false equivalency piece. The difference is now he's making it look as though, I mean, if you look at the gist of his argument, the thrust of this article, in a week when more and more, no newspapers will endorse Donald Trump, newspapers that have a 100% history of never backing a Democrat are going for Hillary Clinton. In the same news cycle, he's trying to say, well, you know what, they're both equally uninspiring, and there's just nothing. There's nothing, in this race that anybody can look forward to.
Yeah.
And instead of, I mean, there's something kind of novel in it. Like we're kind of looking at the same thing from the Vox piece from yesterday, in that Clinton's incrementalist approach is also not very exciting. Whereas here, she's just offering Brooks is saying she's just offering standard liberal tax and spend solutions.
Right.
And it's just, you really, I mean, if anybody in the history of presidential politics knows what it feels like to not be able to win, no matter what you do, I mean, like that would have to be where she's at now.
Yeah.
But this is, to me, I just thought that was worth pointing out, that was like just another facet.
It is great. Yeah. It is great. Yes. It is fabulous. Let me. Can I ask a personal question? I just wanted to. You had put on Facebook several days ago that that the storm was bearing down on you this time, and I never heard anything more. It's great. I mean, when I saw that you were on the line, I felt great about that because I really wasn't sure.
Okay. You hadn't seen. All right. Yeah, I've been relatively,
because I know that there was quite a bit of damage.
The weather always is. We've had, I guess, 3 storms in the last month, and this one just blew past us yesterday. Basically, that we didn't get anything from it. It's been a pretty unusual year for that.
Yeah.
Most of them tend to blow north and do make more trouble with Japan. This year we got a lot in a row. Yeah, a lot of damage has been done around here, but like in our particular neighborhood. We are pretty well situated for that. We did get some stuff this time, but then again, where I happen to live, not really much of an issue.
Yeah.
We had power outages this time, and that's in a climate like this, that can actually be pretty uncomfortable. But not that bad.
Right.
Nothing to complain about.
Well, we're kind of wrestling with a storm that's coming out of the Caribbean now up the East Coast.
Oh, okay.
And the weather pundits are plotting alternative courses. Some people say it's going to come closer to land. Other people say it's going to blow out to sea. It's going to turn east as it comes north. And that all is going to be some high tides and stuff. So ultimately, what we're dealing with is it depends on how close to the continent that the storm comes. That only then we'll know how much damage it's liable to do. But it made me think of you last week because you were kind of looking at a similar situation.
Oh yeah, okay. Well, I've been fairly. I missed like a day of electricity basically, but I've been normally active on the internet and on Facebook and stuff like that since then. Yes. So I didn't realize that you were still kind of in the dark about where we were at.
Well, so I hadn't heard. I just hadn't heard anything. I didn't hear about any major devastation, but on the other hand, I did get the sense that there had been a lot of damage.
Yeah, a bit of flooding in some places, and I think maybe a couple of people died. I mean, obviously that's tragic too, but it not like the major stuff that happened even just comparatively major stuff from like 3 weeks ago, and and all of that compared to previous. We've on balance we've come out pretty well, I think.
Right.
So, and me personally, I'm in about as good a place as you can possibly be for any of this stuff. So.
Right. Well, if I can, back to the idealism issue.
Oh yeah.
Do you? I tend to be a fan of idealism. If that, I know that's not a good way to say it, but in other words, I believe it's absolutely vital.
I consider myself an idealist. How's that?
Yeah. Okay. And what I mean is that the idea that we've got to inject idealism back into our politics and into our nation. It seems to me to be a very, very important issue, and I don't know. You can look at the comparison that Brooks makes, and you can say, well, we can try to do it this way, or we can try to do it that way. I think that's what Brooks is talking about. That ultimately somebody's got to do it. Yeah, I think that's the bottom line, because otherwise we just continue to spiral downhill in a negative way. I mean, I just, it seems, these reports about, this is the first generation where young people haven't expected to do better than their parents and those kinds of things. I mean, those are pretty devastating realities. And you can't. The danger of that is that if people aren't optimistic and aren't positive about the future, and then you begin to get the fallout from that.
Well, what you get cynicism, and cynicism is absolutely fatal.
Oh my God!
Yes. When people turn cynical, I mean it's almost like lights out. It's very hard to reverse course after that, especially if that becomes like a general trend.
Well, that's what I'm saying. If it infects the entire nation, then you really got a problem. I mean, then as you say, it becomes very, very difficult to reverse. So,
and that's one of the reasons why I've been taking this election cycle so much more seriously. I mean, I've been fairly politically active anyway, and discussing with people, but that's really what's gotten my attention is the level of cynicism is just the idea that there's absolutely no difference between either the Democrats or the Republican Party.
Right.
I mean, in the face of all for number one, I don't know how you even reach a conclusion like that in the first place, but I've always been pondering how it's possible to be an undecided voter in October, going back to the last 3-4 presidential election cycles anyway. So, I mean, in a sense, that kind of perplexity is not new to me. But the idea that you could actually think that there is no difference,
right,
or no appreciable difference, that means that people are really it is kind of like a personal lifestyle pocketbook kind of thing. I think about that woman who says, finally Trump is speaking to me.
Yes.
And I wonder, how bad could things have actually gotten in her personal life? I mean, like, if you read about, the things, the attendant, like, little details, like she's here, she's there, she's driving a car, she's got medicine, she's got this. I mean, like, how bad does she really have it that she feels like it's the end of the world for her, compared to anybody else, and still it's made her absolutely fanatic. And how many people are like that are out there, and what are they so angry about?
That's that's what bothers me. Is
that's on the one side. Yeah. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, that's what really bothers me is that I think what Trump's position in the polls is indicating is that there's more of that out there than any of us ever dreamed that there was. And I think a lot of it is probably self-inflicted. I think people get caught up in a mood of cynicism, and they begin to appreciate the fact that cynicism for them seems to fit.
Yeah, and that's on the one side, and on the other side, I have massive, epic arguments with people from a left perspective who want to sit the election out, or they want to vote for a third party, or they want to see Trump win because they think somehow that's going to shake America to their senses, as though the entire Bush administration of 2000, 2008 never happened.
Right.
And how do you talk to someone like that who was there? Who is not, forget about millennials for a second. If you were a teenager during the Bush years, I'll cut you some slack. You didn't see what happened before. You didn't see and you may not have a sense of the general trends of things. I'm having arguments with people like as old as I am or older who should really know better.
Yes.
Who should really know better. And I'm not talking about dumb, uninformed people. I'm talking about people that I don't know how we get there.
Right.
But it's that cynical attitude, like it just doesn't count. Nothing counts. Nothing works, and there's no point. And we might as well just let the whole thing fall down. And I'm talking about people that have children. Like, how do you give up on the entire world when there's so much that you hold dear at stake?
I agree.
And that's our moment. That's our political moment right now. And that's on the left side. On the right side, what do you got to complain about in the first place? For a lot of them, and for some of them, they definitely do. You mentioned West Virginia politics. Now, that's a case in point where I can really understand why people would feel really disaffected and really, disenfranchised.
This is a situation where up until now, there really wasn't a difference between Democrats and Republicans here. I've been here now for about in total about 30 years, maybe a little bit more than that, and 35, and I noticed and have noticed for a long time that what people here who define themselves as Democrats, in my mind, were always Republicans.
Sure. Well, I'm from Oklahoma. It's exactly the same thing there. The only difference between Democrats and Republicans there is who claims to be more devoutly Christian, basically.
Yeah.
That's really what it comes down to. Policy-wise and everything else, it just,
No, and the reason is because government in this state really hasn't been in the driver's seat.
Yeah.
Special interests have. And so the fact of the matter is, whether you were a Democrat or whether you were a Republican, made no material difference in terms of what happened or didn't happen in the state. My sense is that now that we're in the situation we are, for the first time, people have no choice but to look to government to do something. And now government has no recourse except to invest in its own people, which it's never had to do before.
But I don't think
this is a very, to me, this is a very, very positive avenue in a very negative situation. I see this as a form of idealism. I see this as a form of something to be optimistic about, namely that what we're looking for now are a set of policy goals and objectives which do things in West Virginia that have never been done before. And once people begin to see these things unfold, they're going to realize that there are differences between Democrats and Republicans.
Can I ask you to clarify one point? Are you saying that you think that people in West Virginia actually consciously realize that government is their only hope of a chance to get out of this?
No, I don't.
You think that's their reality, and they're inevitably going to have to face up to it? Or
the fact of the matter is, people look at government. Republicans are attacking Democrats by basically saying it's the National Democratic Party that is doing this to you and has done this to you, when in fact it's much closer to home than that.
Right.
And the fact of the matter is, people are being encouraged to distrust government because of what government is doing to them, when in reality, this old idea that Republicans and Democrats are different, not different, it doesn't matter. The fact of the matter is, it does matter, because for the first time, people have an opportunity to see government undertake programs and policies that here in West Virginia we've never seen before. One of the things that has amazed me, I have a lot of friends who are political scientists, and they've been conducting research. And the thing that has amazed them is the degree to which West Virginians have traditionally voted against their own self-interest. They vote the way the companies want them to vote. I mean, they're against government, they're against Social Security, they're against affordable health care, they're against welfare. All of the programs that literally keep them alive, they're opposed to. And it's absurd. And political scientists I've talked to have trouble understanding that. Well, the fact of the matter is, they've been voting the way they're told to vote. And the reason they're voting against their own interests is because the people who are dictating how they vote don't have the same interests that they do.
Well, and also for some reason, the people who dictate those positions hold a position of authority that the voters look up to. They respect. Yeah. Like, these are the people that know what's going on, and that's true as far as it goes. But they think that they hold their best interest in heart, and they say, well, it's the Democrats' fault. Well, then it must be. It's the unions, the greedy old unions. Look at them; they're all lazy and stuff.
Yeah.
Or it's these people over here on Social Security. Not you. You're the good ones, but them. That's why we got to do something about this program. Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what, Dr. Bill, I need to let you go because
buddy. I think we're just about out of time. Thank you.
Just about at it.
What a wonderful contribution. Thank you.
All right. Appreciate it. Talk to you later.
All right. Be safe, buddy. What a wonderful experience. Once again, 2 days in a row, we've had two great calls. We're at 59 minutes after the hour, and we've got to kind of get out of the way here. I want to thank Horst. I want to thank Agnes for getting him on. And most of all, I want to thank you for listening and for your continued support of the Head On Radio Network and of the center, the virtual center. I hope you have a wonderful evening. Everything goes well. We'll be back tomorrow at our regular time for our full 2-hour program. This is Bill O'Brien thanking you once again. I hope you have a wonderful evening. Be kind to each other, and hopefully see you tomorrow. Thank you.